My best friend wanted to set up a Betta tank for her kids, but she's terrified of doing anything wrong and accidentally killing their first family pet. So luckily she has me at her beck and call. So I'm going to share with you guys the step-by-step process I use to help set her up for success. Step one, let's go shopping. So first of all, let's get the aquarium. It depends on if you want to keep the betta fish by itself, because they are kind of territorial and can be semi-aggressive. I would go for a 5-gallon tank versus if you want to try to keep the betta with tank mates. We have a whole video over here on what tank mates would be maybe suitable for your betta. It's gonna depend. Some are just going to be aggressive no matter what, but if you have a pretty chill one, you can try it. But in that case, if you're adding additional fish, you're gonna want at least a 10 or 20-gallon aquarium. A lot of new time fish keepers like to get aquarium kits. So all I would say is just make sure the kit has a lid and a light with it. A lid is definitely necessary because betta fish do like to jump. And then I don't usually use the default filter that comes with these kits because almost always they're way too strong for the betta fish. It's gonna get whipped around in the aquarium, it's gonna stress it out, and a lot of times they end up developing fin rot or other health issues because of the strong current. Now, depending on where you want to put the aquarium, which we'll talk about the importance of location in a second, you may or may not need a tank stand. For example, some people like to put their aquarium on the kitchen counter. However, if it's going to be a standalone setup, you'll want an aquarium stand that can hold up the weight of an aquarium. It's actually rather heavy when you add all that water. So for a 5-gallon tank, I just multiply by 10. It needs to be able to handle about 50 pounds of weight, if not more. Most of the times I just go to the pet store and I buy an aquarium stand that's rated for the size of tank that I'm going to get. My favorite filter for a betta fish would be a sponge filter. They're super gentle with their flow. It's not going to catch its fins or rip them up or anything like that. And so a sponge filter, you'll also have to get some air accessories with it. So it's gonna have to have an air pump that drives it, airline tubing to connect it. I like to have a check valve so it won't accidentally flood when the power goes off, as well as a air stone to put inside of the sponge filter, making the bubbles a little bit smaller and less noisy. Betta fish are tropical fish, so they like to be around 78 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. If you don't keep your house that warm, then I would highly recommend that you get an aquarium heater. For a 5-gallon tank, I usually like to go with 25 watts. If you keep your house really, really cold, maybe 50 watts, and then scale it up depending on the size of your aquarium. I'll put a link down below on what size heater to get depending on the size of your aquarium. Now let's get to the fun part, decorating. So for the bottom of the aquarium, I like to use 5 pounds of gravel, rounded edges only, in a 5-gallon aquarium. We do sell a bioactive gravel on our website that will not only look really good, it's black, so it really, I feel like, emphasizes the colors of the betta fish, but also it helps to speed up the cycling or seasoning process of your aquarium, which I'll talk about in a second. I always recommend that people add aquarium plants, live aquarium plants, because they're so amazing. Not only are they beautiful, natural looking, but also they have the amazing ability to absorb the toxic nitrogen waste that your fish produces when they go to the bathroom. So helps purify the water, very pretty to look at. Just go with some kind of beginner friendly, really easy plant like Anubias, Java Fern, even Marimo moss balls if they're back on the market. Those plants, they don't require any kind of special substrate. They only need low light, and then you just need some easy green all-in-one fertilizer to feed them and keep them happy. If you're not ready to get started on aquarium plants though, but you still want those amazing benefits, Google what kind of house plants you can put in aquariums. My favorite is pothos. You just kind of clip off a little stem, stick it in the water, and it starts growing roots, and it also, again, starts purifying the water for you. As for aquarium decorations, make sure not to get anything with any kind of sharp edges or holes that are way too small for the betta, but he thinks he can fit in them. They like to explore everywhere, and you would be surprised at the number of pictures I've seen of betta fish that got caught in their decorations. I personally like the floating betta log just because it has nice big holes in it. It floats at the surface, and you can actually train it to feed from that log by dropping food through the little portals in it. Very fun. My favorite betta fish foods to recommend would be definitely get a high quality floating betta pellet, one that's smaller in diameter, not too big, because then you'll see them like try to swallow it and then spit it out, swallow it, spit it out. Definitely go for a freeze-dried food like freeze-dried bloodworms, freeze-dried Daphnia. Those are all good choices. And then if you're feeling a little adventurous, go to your local fish store and get some frozen foods for them. They're gonna absolutely love it. It's my favorite way to spoil them. The key is to offer some kind of variety of fish foods, because I definitely had a case where I only gave Betta pellets to my friend to start with, and then her Betta actually ended up developing nutrient deficiencies because that was the only thing he was eating day in and day out. So just like you don't want to eat hamburgers every day, your Betta doesn't want to either. I personally don't usually feed fish flakes because I've had some Betta fish that aren't the best hunters, and so they can't easily find the flakes sometimes, and then it ends up dissolving, sinking to the ground, they never find it, and then the fish tank kind of gets ucky. Finally, let's talk about supplies that every fish tank needs, not just Betta fish tanks. Most people, their tap water has chlorine or chloramine in it, which is not good for fish, and you're gonna want to get some kind of water conditioner or dechlorinator to basically detoxify those chemicals. And then I always recommend getting some kind of starter bacteria. If this is, again, your first fish tank, and we will talk about cycling in a second, you really want to introduce some beneficial bacteria into the aquarium, because like the plants, they're essential for helping to purify the water, because every time your fish goes to the restroom, it's releasing toxic ammonia in there, and you don't want the fish to get sick from it. The one thing I wish I had known as a first-time Betta keeper was get an aquarium siphon. This thing is such a time saver. Instead of having to, I hope you're not doing this, but carry the whole tank to the sink, dump out all the water, take out all the decorations, clean it, and then put everything back. Like, no. The aquarium siphon is basically this small little hose that you use to siphon water or suck water out into a bucket. So you also need a bucket to get that dirty water. And then once you pour the dirty water out, you can use the bucket to get clean water and then pour it back into the tank. So definitely get an aquarium siphon. I will link right here how to use one. Very, very simple. Most people don't think to get ammonia and multi-test strips, but anytime you're not sure why your fish is acting weird or maybe getting sick, you want to immediately do water tests to find out, is there something in the water that is poisoning them? It's also a good way to tell, like, when should I clean my tank? Sometimes the toxic ammonia I talked about, it's invisible, it's clear, it's in the water, so you can't see it visibly with your eye, and yet it could be harming your fish. Plus, it's another good way to tell when your plants need fertilizer. So a lot of good things come up by having these water test kits, and I would definitely recommend them, just so that, you know, when your fish aren't feeling well, you'll have some way of kind of diagnosing what's going on. Speaking of sick fish, I personally gave my friend some kind of a first aid kit of medications for Betta fish, because I already had medication stashed. So I did a couple packets of Maricin, which is an antibiotic, a couple packets of Paraclins, which treats internal parasites, and then I personally have on hand ICX, which treats fungus and external parasites. Medications can be kind of expensive, so I would definitely budget it. If you can't get it right now, another alternative would be regular salt. So aquarium salt, rock salt, is made of sodium chloride. That is kind of a good first line of defense, but the better option would be the actual medications to treat the actual diseases, if you can. Is your wallet feeling a little lighter now? Well, I have good news. We're gonna go on to step 2, finally. So location. Very important on where you put the tank or the tank stand. Ideally, you want your tank near some kind of electrical outlet or somewhere where at least you can kind of put a power strip to, because, you know, we've got several pieces of equipment that we need power for, as well as hopefully near the water source. You know, as close as you can be, it'll make your water changes a little bit easier. I personally like to make sure that my tank is not in direct sunlight. Indirect is fine, but direct sunlight, it can affect the temperature of the tank as well as probably grow a lot of algae. Nobody likes that. And then speaking of temperature, I also don't want my tank right next to like the air conditioning or heating vents, because especially if it's a smaller tank like 5 gallons, that can affect the temperature pretty quickly. And then final tip is, let's put it somewhere where the tank is not going to get bumped into a lot. So not like a busy hallway where kids and dogs are constantly racing back and forth. We want to put it somewhere safe so that our fish won't get harmed. Step 3, all right, you've got all your stuff. Let's rinse it with warm water really quickly. You definitely don't want to use any soap. That will harm your fish, especially if you don't get it completely off. So we're just gonna rinse it with water just to make sure any dust or stuff that kind of settled on it while it was in the fish store gets rinsed out. So your tank, your substrate, your decorations, equipment, all of that. And then bonus, if you want to be extra special, I like to do, before I install anything, I like to fill the tank up with water and then have it sit for 24 hours to do a leak test, just to make sure there's no tiny little cracks or areas that I'm having problems with, because then if I do see something, hopefully you bought it from a local pet store or fish store and you can easily return the tank and get a new one. Step 4, let's start putting stuff into the aquarium. So what I'm gonna do is you wanna put your heater and your filter in the tank. Do not plug them in yet, we're just doing the interior decorating right now. So you're gonna position them in an area where you think they won't be as obvious, and then you're going to place the decorations and plants in front of them to kind of hide them from view. Now, if you did purchase plants like Anubias and Java Fern that kind of have a thick horizontal rhizome, you do not want to bury that rhizome into the substrate or into the gravel. That's kind of a mistake that a lot of people don't know about, but these plants actually do not need substrate at all. So instead you can stuff it into the cracks and crevices of decorations, or if you have super glue or super glue gel, you can glue them to little rocks and that will kind of help weigh them down. Again, make sure the rocks are safe for your aquarium, and then do not smother that rhizome entirely with glue or it will suffocate and not do well for you. Step 5, time to add in the water. So you're gonna pour in the tap water, add the appropriate number of squirts of dechlorinator, so it will detoxify the chlorine and other toxic chemicals that are in there. And then usually for the heater, the instructions say like wait 30 minutes for the heater to temperature acclimate before you can plug it in. So then you can plug in the heater, plug in the filter, and then make sure those power cords have a drip loop. Again, there's usually instructions in your manual to make sure that water doesn't flow down the cable and then accidentally flow into the power outlet. Now at this point, the tank is not ready for fish yet, so we actually need to do what is called cycling or seasoning an aquarium, where we want to grow the plants and grow the beneficial bacteria so that there's enough biological filtration in this tank for your fish to live in without being immediately poisoned by its own ammonia it produces when it goes to the restroom. So we have a whole video over here on how to cycle your aquarium, but make sure to do that first. And then step 6, it is finally the day to add your new betta fish. So I like to dose a little bit more of the starter bacteria on the day I'm gonna add new fish. I personally like to use Fritz-Zyme 7, it's really great. Once you get your fish, you're going to put him when he's in the bag or in the container, you're gonna float that container in the tank water so that the temperature inside his container and the temperature in the tank water is the same before you dump them in. So it's called temperature acclimation. We don't want to shock them. After the 20 minutes, you want to drain out all of that fish water that came from the fish store and then just only put the fish into the tank. Usually I like to feed very, very lightly, especially the first week. Most fish, if they're healthy and strong, they can go like a week or 2 without any feedings at all. But the reason why I feed him lightly is because every time he goes to the restroom, it's creating more of that toxic ammonia and nitrogen waste. And I just want to make sure that the beneficial bacteria and the plants can keep up with that bioload. If you do see that the water gets really cloudy and milky, it may be a bacterial bloom because the beneficial bacteria is like, wow, there's a lot more waste than we can handle. We need to multiply. And so that's what they're doing. I wouldn't worry about it. You don't need to do an immediate water change. What I would do is maybe fast my fish for a few days. Don't feed them. Don't add any more organics basically into the tank, and then add some more Fritz-Zyme 7 or starter bacteria if you need to. Many times at Aquariumcoop, we like to recommend that you prophylactically treat your new fish, all new fish, with our quarantine medication trio, with the antibiotics, the anti-parasitic and antifungal medications, just to make sure they're completely clean. However, with betta fish, they actually usually grow up in isolation because they are so territorial toward each other. So most likely he's not going to have any transmitted diseases, but hopefully you have that first aid kit ready in case you do observe any symptoms with your new fish. All right, now that we've got the tank set up, the fish is in there, now it's time to have our regular routine of feeding the fish, regularly cleaning the tank. So for more details, check out our Betta Fish Care Guide over here for next steps.